Whales, arguably the most important resource of the 18th century, were brought in by the people of New Bedford, Massachusetts. But what you may not have known is the fascinating story behind the Azorian whalers helping to create this through their immigration to the New Bedford area. Portuguese immigrants affected the whaling industry and society of New Bedford by becoming involved in the local economy, bringing in whales to supply the world, and helping to make New Bedford the whaling capital of the world. The Azorian Islands, an archipelago in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, was the group of islands, along with Cape Verde, that had an incredible influence on the whaling in New Bedford. These islands were uninhabited for thousands of years, but then in the 1400s they were soon filled with hopeful immigrants, mainly from Portugal. These people fled to the Azores for the same reasons that they later fled the Azores to come to America. The Europeans left their homes to come to the Azores because of crime, starvation, overpopulation, rebellion, and some other similar causes. The newly discovered Azores were soon filled with hopeful immigrants. As time passed and overpopulation came to the Azores Islands, people began to experience problems. There simply weren't enough jobs for all the people on the islands. There was also a fee of $300 for any person of military age that wanted to leave the islands. When the Azores were in bad shape, the whaling industry arrived. Whaling in the 19th century was controlled almost as much on dry land as it was at sea. Large American whaling vessels were deployed to specific cruising grounds in the North Atlantic and were told to return at specific times with a certain material depending on the market, such as whale oil, sperm oil, or other material. At the top of tall masts there were lookouts, always keeping sharp watch for whales while cruising. When whales were spotted, smaller whaleboats were lowered over the side, and the chase was on. These smaller boats would hunt down the whales. Then the whalemen would use many different types of weapons to bring the whales in. The most used was the toggle-head harpoon, but whalers of this time still needed other weapons to take out these beasts. These included traditional harpoons, shoulder guns, blubber room spades, and model tryworks. These commercial whaling tools were very heavy-duty, made of iron and steel, and made for heavy and repetitive use. These tools helped New Bedford in the 1800s to be called the whaling capital of the world. Whales in the time of the 1800s were used for things that you would need every day. Sperm oil, for example, was found in the blubber of a sperm whale, and it was in high demand these times. It was used for many different kinds of lamps, including lighthouses and public and private areas. It was also used for lubricating rapid machinery because it kept its lubrication in very high temperatures. Cities all over the world needed sperm oil to light their streets at night. Without the valuable oil, the world would have been much more dark. Like sperm oil, the main reason for whales to be hunted, spermaceti, a valuable oil from these whales, was prized for its ability to burn at high temperatures without melting easily and not giving a scent.
Spermaceti whale oil burned very clean, very brightly, no smell almost, no smoke, and so it was the lighting fuel. It also became the quintessential lubrication for for machinery during the Industrial Revolution.
The other type of oil in the whale industry was simply whale oil. Regular whale oil was used for many of the same uses as sperm oil, but it was less valuable. It was also important to the mining industry, as it was used in miners' headlamps. Baleen from the whales were used for many things that plastic or steel would be used for today. Baleen is the part of the whale that acted as its teeth, and it was used for hoop in women's skirts, umbrella ribs, and fishing poles. Being short of a material like baleen at this time would be like having a lack of plastic or metal today. Whales were also hunted for their most valuable resource, ambergris, which would come in lumps and would be used as an aphrodisiac, incense, medicine, and other things. Believe it or not, whaling was introduced to the Azorian people by Americans who stopped at these islands during their long voyages around the North Atlantic. The American whaling vessels stopped at these islands for food and supplies. Because of the Azores' surrounding oceans being filled with prized sperm whales, many American ships began to stop here, and here lay a life-changing opportunity for many struggling Azorians.
They would land there, they would buy provisions. They had agents there too. They would drop barrels of oil off, which would get onto another ship and go to Europe for market. But another thing they did there, a very important commodity, was men, actually boys, your age, okay, who were not afraid of whales because they had land-based whales out of the Azores.
Azorian men were taken on board the American whaling vessels as crew and brought back to America. They were hard workers and great crewmen, plus they worked for a good price, which was good for the Americans.
So the ships often left New Bedford crew light, and they would sail around the Horn and to the Azores and Cape Verde looking for whalers. And they liked to pick up the Azorean and Cape Verdean whalers because they were really good at it. They were used to very rough water. They were not afraid of whales, and they didn't mind going out on whale ships for longer periods of time.
On whaling vessels, men got paid by the amount of whale they got. Each crew member got paid a lei, or a percent of the profit made. A captain would get the most, while an ordinary crewman would get much less. However, there was a catch. When the Azorean men got back to the Azores after years of labor on the ships and asked for payment, they often received nothing because the ship's whale oil was yet to be sold.
You were homesick and you wanted to get off. When you got home, you wanted to get off the ship. You saw your mother and your brothers and sisters on the pier, and you say, "Pay me, I'm home." And the captain would say, "Well, we can't pay you here. We can't pay you here. We haven't sold our oil yet."
They had to journey back to New Bedford to get paid. When they reached New Bedford, most felt the need to stay, for there was much economic opportunity. The men would see jobs for whaling and even jobs outside of it. The men could get into these jobs, which helped the economy, making every industry, including whaling, more prosperous, and jobs that included any craft that helped whaling ships in particular greatly helped the industry. These Azorean people would often use the money they earned to send for the rest of their families to come to America.
They settled here. They stayed here. And then one by one, they brought relatives over. And so, over the course of more than 100 years between the Azores and Cape Verde, it's what we call a bridge of whale ships. You had whale ships going back and forth to the Azores and Cape Verde, bringing crew members here to New Bedford. And so the population of Azorean heritage Americans and Cape Verdean heritage Americans grew here, and their family grew here.
This system brought over many more Portuguese to America. The Azorean men now working on the whaling vessels in America would also send money back to their families on the islands simply to let them have a better life there. This had great effect on the Portuguese islands because money was going into their nation. Great news began to spread of the success that immigrants were having that went to America. This made it even more tempting for a struggling European to want to immigrate to America. At this time in history, many Portuguese had immigrated to the New Bedford area. New Bedford had the highest population of Portuguese in a single city in all of America. A whole 16% of the population in New Bedford was Portuguese. When they got there, they became very involved in the local economy, especially the whaling industry. They also worked at textile mills, docks, and agricultural workplaces. Whaling had a huge impact on the Portuguese because it was what brought many of them to America, and it was what employed them in their new society. Whaling was actually almost a glorious trade at this time. It was perilous and dangerous work, so you had to be a skilled worker, and this brought excitement. These whalemen were treated fairly, as long as they did their job and acted properly.
You were going to work hard, you were going to follow orders, you weren't going to commit crimes, you weren't afraid of whales, and you could work 5 hours a day if you needed to get the job done and to get home in record time.
You would get to say that you whaled out of a town that supplied more than half of the whaling needs for around the world. It was in 1823 when the whaling fleet in New Bedford overtook the title from the whaling industry in Nantucket. This was a very important mark in whaling history because Nantucket had a very large fleet. Later in the 1800s, 400 out of the over 700 ships in the world called New Bedford their home port. Because of all the economic growth in New Bedford became the wealthiest city per capita in the world. This was mainly from the whales being brought in at the time. Whales were so large that a single sperm whale could hold nearly 3 tons of oil. Oil was very valuable at 30 cents for a half gallon in 1831 and $1.77 per half gallon in 1854. This shows the rapid growth in the need for whale oil in the 1800s. All of the rich whale vessel captains of the time built their large homes by the water from their success. There's no doubt that New Bedford and the whaling there made a big impact on the whole world. Much credit goes out to the Portuguese whalers that helped to make this great history happen. And even though the whaling industry did eventually decline and die out, it made an incredible difference in the lives of millions, billions of people in so many ways. It lit the streets of thousands of cities worldwide. It allowed for there to be brighter lamps. Its lubrication purposes allowed for the Industrial Revolution to have fast-moving machinery. Portuguese immigrants affected the whaling industry in New Bedford by bringing in whales to supply all people and helping to make New Bedford the whaling capital of the world.